Thing about the 100% bill, if you work in energy at all and you know anything about energy, to meet that rigorous goal, you need every single level of scale for solar. You need rooftop solar, you need community solar, and you also need wind, hydro possibly, nuclear plays a role. So you need this broad portfolio to quickly meet that goal.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Sounds of Solar podcast. I'm your host, Christoph Brun. Sitting to my left today is another esteemed gentleman,
Russell Hamilton.
Russ, any updates you want to tell the viewers and listeners about?
So yesterday, I volunteered up north. I can't remember the name of the camp. I stepped in for Andy. He couldn't make it.
How up north are we talking here?
Nishwa? Brainerd area?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's up north. That qualifies.
So went up north, and Shreyas went up with me. Spent the day taking a bunch of kids on four-wheeler rides, or ATV rides, and it was really fun. It was a good day.
So. Wonderful.
How about you? What do you got going on? Anything coming up?
Well, my partner Carly and I are finishing building out our 2013 Freightliner Sprinter van.
Nice.
And we've got plans to go to work a 3-day art fair in Arizona in March. So this is my last recording for about a month. And we're going to be hanging out in Arizona, doing outdoor stuff for one thing. And then secondly, doing the art fair. And that's going to be selling the cocktail infusion kits. That is her business. And so if you've never had one, you should try one. They are delicious.
You need to hook me up.
Oh, everyone's getting hooked up.
What are you going to do in Arizona? Where are you hiking? What are you biking? What are you doing? I know there's a lot of stuff out there. So what's on the dock?
Kind of endless. So we're going to be in Prescott the first 2 weeks, and then we're going to be staying with family the last 2 weeks in the Phoenix area. Excited to go to Prescott. Never been there. Notably, if you're in Arizona, it's Prescott, like biscuit. If you're in Wisconsin, it's Prescott.
Interesting.
Don't make that mistake. You'll get called out down there.
Very interesting. Do you know, tidbit, did you know that there was a survey done and the most misspelled word in Wisconsin was Wisconsin? True story. Don't get mad at me, Wisconsin.
I can't say I'm surprised. Of all of those town names, those original Native American town names, I'm very surprised that the state name is the most butchered one.
I can't even read half of them. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, let's not even try it.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving swiftly on, we have a very special guest today, Logan O'Grady. What is your official title at MNSEA?
I'm the executive director.
He's the executive director.
And MNSEA is the Minnesota Solar Energy Industries Association. Just so everybody knows.
Well, we're very excited to have you on today. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. Can you give a high-level overview of what MNSEA is and what the mission is?
Yeah, so MNSEA, or the Minnesota Solar Energy Industries Association, we are an official affiliate of the National Solar Energy Industries Association, so SEA. They are our parent organization, and they are based in DC, and they really focus on federal lobbying work, advocacy work on behalf of the solar industry. So we do that same thing just at a state level here in Minnesota. We have about 160 corporate members now. That's the largest we've had ever in our existence. We were established in 2009, so we're celebrating our 15th birthday this summer. And what we do is we provide policy expertise, analysis, advocacy at different levels of government. So my main focus, I'm our lead at the Capitol, is legislative policy development. What our goal is to really create a predictable, stable, reliable industry for all of our members to work in. So that means that we have to establish statutes and public policies that are predictable and friendly to businesses, and so we can attract investors and businesses here to help deploy solar and decarbonize.
Is MNSEA's focus more residential? Is it community? Do you guys dabble in utility scale policy and regulatory concerns?
Yeah, so we are across the board representatives. So we represent everyone from small rooftop installers all the way up to utility scale developers and everywhere in between. I will say that we have a particular niche around the distributed side of things. So distributed generation solar or distributed energy resources.
It seems like that's kind of where, if you're looking at like ground mount type developments, that's what Minnesota has. There's not a lot of like 200 megawatts giant utility scale projects out there.
Yeah, we only have a handful of utility scale projects, and most of those are still not even fully energized and deployed yet. They're planned for or will be or are in the process of being built. So we have about 1.6 gigawatts of solar in Minnesota right now. 890 of those 890 megawatts, so just over half of those, are community scale solar. We were the top community solar garden program in the country until about 2 years ago when New York surpassed us, and they are still number one. We are a top 3 community solar state, though. I find that really impressive because if you are competing with states like California, New York, in anything else, like that's super impressive, right? So the fact that when people say community solar, Minnesota is one of the first states that comes to their mind, I think that's something we should be really proud of here. And it's definitely been one of the reasons we've been able to deploy clean energy so quickly.
Regarding the legislative sessions that are coming up, can you describe what MNSEA's role is, what's happening in solar in Minnesota as far as public policy goes?
Yeah, my staff gets sick when I say this, but I always say that we are the voice of the solar industry in the room. And I say that because wherever there is a room in Minnesota that there is a decision being made about the solar industry or that impacts the solar industry, we are in that room, making sure that the people making those decisions understand the impact on the 5,000 Minnesotans that work within our industry and the 160 companies that we represent and are in that industry too. Most of my time is spent in lawmakers' offices trying to advocate for and advance our legislative agenda or the needs of our industry. I show up in hearing rooms where I'm publicly testifying. So our role is really to advance solar energy policy to create that predictable ecosystem for our member companies. So this legislative session is a short session. We have a biennium in Minnesota. So the first year the legislature comes in, they pass a 2-year budget. They usually come in January on those years and go all the way through the end of May. And then the next year, since they've already passed that budget, they really don't have to do anything. And it's usually reserved for like policy that's non-budget stuff that needs to be done. Or there's a bonding bill that's separate from the overall budget for like local government construction projects, basically. So this session, the 2023 session was one of the most productive sessions in the history of our state. I think there's some reasons for that because, as I mentioned before, we had a divided government for so long that there was just like a backlog of so many things that just could not get done.
When was the last time that we did not have a divided government?
Yeah, so I was
like
a staffer in the Senate the last time that we had a trifecta of Democrats running the whole government, and that was the 2013-14.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't as long ago as I thought.
I don't know when the last time, or if ever, if Republicans ever had that, because we've had a DFL governor.
Maybe back in the
so
Arnie
long.
Carlson days.
Possibly,
He's
yeah.
a Republican, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the outcome of the last election really surprised everybody at the Capitol. We were expecting best case scenario, Republicans would hold the Senate, Democrats would hold the House, and the Democrats would hold the governor's office, and we'd be just in.
Tim Walz is my neighbor, you know that, right?
Really?
Well, I mean, he lives down the road on Summit.
Right on Summit, there you go. Yeah.
We hang out frequently, of course. Hey, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, the whole what is possible changed in the last election, and so I think, early last January, Democrats moved very quickly on 100% carbon-free standard and passed that in like record speed. It was passed by the end of January.
When stuff like that happens, sort of interject, is there already a plan in the queue? Like, had Democrats been like basically forecasting, hey, if this happens, this is our policy moving forward, and when the trifecta, that sort of situation arises, it's like, we know exactly what to do. Here's what we're doing. Is that kind of how it goes?
I think it can go that way, but I don't think in the last election that happened that way because nobody expected that outcome at all. And the Democrats, so the Republicans had basically a 1-seat majority, and the Democrats flipped a few seats, and now they have a 1-seat majority. So it's really quite a tight margin. I think with the 100% bill, That was worked on for 5 years prior. And the Senate, run by Republicans at the time, never held a hearing on it. The House passed it multiple times. So there was already an iteration of that bill floating around for multiple years.
I see. Okay.
So I think it made it really easy for them to come in and pass it because they had already had it around for a while. Because this will be my 10th legislative session working at the Capitol in different, obviously, roles. I'd never seen a bill passed that quickly before. It was signed into law by the governor in early February, so it was very swift.
Can you elaborate what the plan is exactly? The 100%?
Okay, so the 2040 law requires our state to move to 100% carbon-free energy by the year 2040. And there are certain benchmarks in there that we have to get to, 80% by a certain year. So it kind of steps up. And there's certain ways that utilities can meet that, because it's really a requirement on utilities, right? Because they have to procure the carbon-free energy from different sources. So it requires that of all of them, which is quite rare. A lot of our other programmatic requirements and other things throughout the history of kind of our energy policy in Minnesota has exempted some of those smaller utilities from those things. So it requires 100% carbon-free by 2040, and they can reach it through, obviously, solar, wind. I think hydro's in there as well. Nuclear, I think, is technically carbon-free, although we have a nuclear moratorium in Minnesota where we can't build any new nuclear facilities. They can purchase renewable energy credits from other states and other markets to discount if they are over the requirement at all. So there's different ways to meet it, but by and large, it's just a requirement that all of our energy be procured by carbon-free sources by 2040. And that's only 16 years away, so that's not far away.
Yeah, it goes by quick.
Yeah.
Shifting on here, looking forward, beyond 2024, and even right now, are there technologies or industry trends that you are seeing that are positives for Minnesota, or that you can see that are, can have positive impact moving forward?
Yeah. So I think the thing about the 100% bill, if you work in energy at all and you know anything about energy, to meet that rigorous goal, that again is only 16 years away from now, you need all of the above. You need every single level of scale for solar. You need rooftop solar. You need community solar. We created this new DG program, which is larger than community solar, but smaller than utility scale solar. And you do need utility scale solar. And you also need wind, and you also need the other requirements in the 100% bill. Hydro, possibly. Nuclear plays a role. So you need this broad portfolio to quickly meet that goal. And so what I find really interesting right now is the legislature is currently looking at energy storage and how much of that does Minnesota need to meet our 2040 goal. What we're doing is we're saying, yeah, you need utility scale batteries, just like you need batteries for someone's home. And I love behind the meter stuff, and I really love distributed generation. It's like my passion. So I'm looking at how do we put more batteries in people's houses? And as people buy electric vehicles, those are basically batteries on wheels, right? And so that's what I think is going to be in the next decade. The really exciting development is battery storage. And there's a lot of policy things that we need to figure out, though, to actually implement battery storage in the right way. And we are working on some of those things. But the other thing is just the technology is coming so quickly. Solar, just in general, is getting, smaller and more efficient. Solar shingles are becoming a thing. If you saw, I think it was NPR had an article on solar snow fencing. So I think we're just going to start seeing it around more.
Yeah, and especially solar shingles are a good example of an adapted technology to fit, be a dual purpose, right? I think we're going to see a lot of that moving forward. I mean, there's vertically installed panels. Instead of having a wooden fence around your house, suddenly you have a solar fence around your house. It's that's kind of a great idea, of course. Dual purpose.
Yeah. I like the idea of BESS, obviously Raj would like that conversation as well. Raj is our BESS director here. But I do work on a lot of BESS projects, but I don't think any in Minnesota.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's
Not yet.
if there's much in Minnesota for battery storage at the moment?
There are some. So one of the bills I worked on in 2017 that, again, we had a Republican House and Senate, and we thought Republicans would love it because it's battery storage, a up and coming new technology, business opportunity, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't as embraced as I thought it would be, but one of the things that we did pass was requiring utilities to start planning for storage and in their integrated resource plans, as well as their ability to do pilot projects. And we have seen Xcel Energy partnered with Form Energy, and they have some long duration stuff going out right now. I think it has to be constructed. On the smaller side of things, like I said, we don't have any ground rules for battery storage right now in the state. So you can buy a Tesla Powerwall, for example, and integrate it into a rooftop solar system, but you're just basically charging that up and then using it yourself.
Yep.
We don't have the ability to, let's say it's 100 degrees in July and everybody's running their air conditioners and you have a stored battery at home, and you could actually deploy that battery to the utility and reduce peak demand charges. We don't have any policy structure around that. So there's like, how do you compensate that battery owner? That doesn't exist anymore yet. Actually fully use battery storage, we need a lot of policies to be developed still.
Very interesting. So it's the same system needed that's already kind of in place with distributed PV generation, where you're selling, or your residential, where you see your statement, it's like, well, we sold a bunch of energy to the grid this month instead of okay.
Same thing. It just there's no rate structure there. So, and I don't
Is that on the table?
It's part of our energy storage legislation that we've been pushing for a couple of years, and we pushed last year. It came out of last year's energy storage bill. We kind of negotiated on this study that's coming out later this month of how much energy storage do we need to meet our 2040 goals. And our hope is to use that as a tool to say, look, we need X, gigawatts of storage. And a certain percentage of that needs to be behind the meter storage.
Right. And I mean, battery technology is so new. So it's, when was there even an opportunity other than now to even get this into place?
Yeah. It's interesting because one of our residential rooftop installers, who's our largest member, they add batteries to, I think, 25 to 30% of their projects. So that's a pretty big number.
It is, yeah.
But again, I'm like, what are people doing with those batteries other than just
charging, discharging?
Yeah. And that's such
because
a waste.
Their homes are still connected to the grid, right? So it'd be different if you were completely independent. So like, obviously you need your battery, you need to like monitor, you use it like your phone battery, like probably shouldn't be on Instagram right now with 2% battery, like.
And it's just a waste of an asset, that we don't have any policy behind it. And I don't even know, I should actually figure this out. I don't even know if they set up the battery to be able to deploy back to the grid yet or not.
If it was though, would it be any different than excess PV generation? Like, no. As long as there was outgoing power out of your residential system, whether it's generated via the PV panels or the battery, it should be effectively the same.
Yeah, right? Which is why we've said like this policy of, we call it like a peak demand charge, or basically net metering for batteries is not it's not a controversial idea, and so it should be. It creates a whole other problem, though. I'm sorry, we're now going into the weeds on these things.
Go there, you must go.
There are certain size limitations on behind-the-meter solar that you can build in Minnesota. So most of the time, it's 40 kW in other regions, and I think in Xcel, if you're part of Solar Awards, you can go up to 120% of your load as a residential home. How does a battery impact those limits? Those are other rules that have not been developed. Now, the utility is going to say that counts against your limit, because the utility's goal is to shrink solar systems to as small as possible because it directly competes with them, right? But we don't think that's fair, because you may self-use that whole battery and not even deploy it at all. So it shouldn't count against your limits. But that is another part of our energy storage bill that hasn't gotten done yet. So
we have a few more questions here. One thing just on this topic I want to ask is, we live in a utopia. What does that look like to you? Is regarding residential solar and how it works?
I don't love monopoly utilities. I just don't.
I think that's a controversial opinion.
Oh, it is.
Maybe outside this room it is.
understand why they were created and why they still exist. And in many ways, like, I don't want 5 different power lines going through my front yard, right? So I understand why we established things the way that we did. And I don't think we should eliminate them. There actually was a bill in 2017 to kind of eliminate the regulatory process and go to more of a competitive energy landscape here in Minnesota, and it went nowhere.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that. I'm not that crazy. But I am saying that I think that there should be more ability for people to, quote, live off grid, even though that doesn't
Control
really
their
exist.
energy, right? Not only have one singular option.
So I would love it if everybody had some sort of solar system at their property that they could own and control. It democratizes solar energy, or the energy landscape, right? People have more ability to buy into it. They have more control over it. It's actually more secure, right? If we're a society where all of our energy generating sources are localized to these big power generating plants, what happens if there's a cyber attack or a physical, terrorist attack or whatever?
Yeah, we've seen that.
Yeah, we were. I mean, where were we at? We were driving, and we were driving back to the metro from up north, and it was a crazy experience. It was at night, and suddenly I think we got into Maple Grove on 94, and everything went out. Like, I've never seen that in my life, where there was just a mass power outage, and it was just like this like time warp almost. Like, oh, 1 minute we were here, next minute we weren't. Like, what just happened? And I mean, to your point, like, that is something that people could have autonomy over potentially. Like, if you had your own PV generation system, your own battery storage on site. Like, I don't know.
My uncle lives in California, and he has solar on his house, and they have rolling brownouts quite a bit. And he's one of the few houses that continues to have power, obviously during that time.
That's something we take for granted here. That's not a thing here, but it's a fact of life there.
Yeah, so I think we saw a story in Florida during, I think, one of the hurricanes where there was this community that was a microgrid, right? So it was completely separated from the overall, grid.
Yeah.
And it was the only community that didn't lose power.
Yeah.
Again, just going back to kind of my analogy of rent versus own, this is the only sector of our economy where we tell people it's better to rent forever from a monopoly utility that has all the control and all the data than it is to own your own system.
Sure.
Oh, and by the way, you don't actually get to choose who you rent from either. We're going to tell you who it is. So there's a lot of...
It's a public-private, weird gray area too.
Yeah. People think I'm probably extreme on that, and I'll probably never get appointed to the Public Utilities Commission, which I would never want to do in the first place. But people want you to support the regulatory compact, is what it's called, for good reasons, like I said. But I also think that there are ways that we can be a little bit more flexible and give people more choice.
I did want to touch on a lot of what we're talking about. Obviously, having Minnesota go green, renewable. What's in plan for the infrastructure? Obviously, that's one of the challenges that we face in all of our areas. Our solar sites are sized to a particular size that the grid can handle, right? The infrastructure of that grid. Yeah. So is there plans in place to, beefing up the grid, bring it up to modern day?
Beef it up.
You know what I mean, though.
Yeah. These are words that we use around the office, technical terms.
No, it's a good question. So I view this again as like separating the transmission side of things from the distribution side of things. And there are things that we need to do on both of those sides to meet our 2040 goal and just deploy more clean energy more efficiently. So there's a lot of focus after the 2040 goal last year, this upcoming session. And I think just nationally, as more and more states pass clean energy goals, like Michigan just passed one, I think Maryland did, other states. And, we have operators throughout the country that operate those portions of the grid. And so it becomes a multi-state concern rather than just like a Minnesota concern.
Yeah.
It's extremely expensive to make the transmission upgrades that we need to make. So money is a thing. I think Xcel in Colorado has an insanely expensive proposal to upgrade their transmission system. So we need to find the capital somewhere. And I think there are parts of the Federal Inflation Reduction Act that will provide utilities with grants to do that. So that incentive thing that you were talking about. But the other issue that we're dealing with too is permitting. To permit a 50 megawatt or utility scale solar or wind or whatever battery storage project, you have a much more robust permitting process that you have to do. You have to go through environmental reviews.
Right.
You have restrictions on the land. There's this thing called the prime farmland rule that completely prohibits anything, any generating source above 50 megawatts on prime farmland. That was created decades ago because people didn't want to use up prime farmland for a coal plant or a nuclear site. That has to be modernized because now a wind farm you can farm around, or even a solar farm you can implement agrivoltaics and get benefits from. And I would even argue that actually removing some farmland from production helps with volatility in commodity prices. So
And also, Logan, here's a trivia question for you. How much food is wasted in the United States?
a lot.
40%.
40%.
40 freaking percent. Like,
That's crazy.
That's a whole other topic of something that could be addressed to address or to fix, our maybe over farming. Is that a thing? I don't know, but
And how much of that waste is composted? That's a whole other issue.
exactly.
too.
Yeah, not much.
So
We're getting off topic.
Yeah,
but still,
Well, we'll save that for next time.
So yeah, the permitting piece is real, and it is something that I know the majority leader in the House is working on with a bunch of different stakeholders. We are in on that call too, mostly to try and support. So the transmission piece, expensive permitting issues. The distribution side of things has its own problems. You may have seen stories in the paper about how in Xcel Energy territory in particular, to just interconnect a small rooftop system is taking like 30 years.
That's ridiculous.
And that's because you need a bunch of expensive upgrades on that side of things too. So we have legislation that we're working on this session for kind of a cost sharing fund for that, where our developers put money into a fund that can go to upgrading, a number of different things to help try and, create more capacity on the system for solar.
When I hear some of these things, right, it just as somebody who works in the industry, it's frustrating because it's opinionated, right? There's a need, like you said, our Dennis said earlier, he wants his motivation is for our children to have a better world, right? And it's like, yes, these things might cost money now, but somebody's got to be able to look long term and say these are actually benefits, not just for for the planet, but for our families and for everything. And it's like frustrating that like some people just cannot seem to get on board to understand that they're very short sighted on things.
Absolutely, the cost argument is a huge one in the solar industry, and you're seeing it all across the country. If you've been paying attention to California at all, they just completely gutted their rooftop solar system there because the utilities were going around saying this is super expensive energy and this is why your energy prices are going up. A complete fallacy. Not true at all.
We looked at this, and the cost of solar is less now than the cost of coal. And so it's interesting that that's something somebody with money, somebody with power is definitely,
You can control the narrative.
You drive over to Iowa, right across the border, there's big billboards that say renewables is not the energy. And it's like,
then what is?
What's the purpose? Like, what is the motivation to put up a billboard like that? I just don't understand it.
Yeah, we just had a big hearing yesterday at the Public Utilities Commission, and they cut compensation rates for community solar subscribers by 30%, risking the whole industry. I think a lot of these contracts will be underwater, and people may actually owe money in, which is going to frustrate a lot of customers. And the whole reason that that decision was made is because the utilities have a very coordinated and effective strategy to blame solar in particular, and in our state, community solar specifically, for rising energy costs. And it's just not true at all. If the reason energy costs in Minnesota are rising is because the Public Utilities Commission just approved an increase in rates for natural gas. Has nothing to do with solar. But
like you said, it's a direct competitor, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, what's the incentive for these utilities to change how they're producing energy? It's just like, I think the auto industry, how long did I remember in the 80s, they had electric cars in the 70s, 80s. They bought all that technology up and they shelved it, right? They made it go away. It's a frustrating point, I think, of like, I understand from their standpoint, right? They have money, they have power, they don't want to lose it, So how do they transition to renewables?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we've built our entire regulated electric utility industry around the idea of them basically constructing things and making money off of it. So we're seeing issues right now of repowering wind, for example, where there's still quite a number of years left on wind contracts and the life of wind turbines, but utilities are pulling them all out and putting in new ones because they can make money off of it rather than just using what they have.
Wow.
So I think there needs to be a discussion about how do we restructure the industry to incentivize utilities to participate more in different ways.
A couple more things here. Wondering if we can talk about some case studies, success stories around Minnesota projects. Any particular things you want to highlight in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Form battery one. We're watching. Connexus Energy is doing some stuff on battery storage that we're watching pretty closely. When you're talking large scale, the Sherco power plant that was closed and they're now doing a large utility solar development there. We're watching that.
Where's that at?
Sherco is up in Benson, isn't it?
Oh, in Benson.
I remember playing hockey there as a youth. That's about it.
Because isn't there a big project that's going to be in Becker?
Maybe it's Becker.
Yeah, because they have the two. They have
That's where the
nuclear power plant. They have the coal power plants right there, and then there was like a big, huge. I can't remember. Was it 100? Was it 1,000 megawatts or 1 gigawatt of solar they're going to put in there to replace those?
Yeah. Because that plant is decommissioned or is
It's going to be
decommissioned. Yeah.
We're watching that one because so often within the solar industry, there are internal struggles, I would say. And when the utilities talk about costs, they so often compare community solar or rooftop solar cost to utility scale solar. And they say, community scale solar is X dollars per kilowatt hour more expensive than a utility scale solar project. We don't actually know that in Minnesota because we don't have an energized utility scale solar project yet, at least in Excel territory. So we're watching that because I want to see what the final numbers come in at, because I don't necessarily believe that when you count everything in that it's going to be that much more cost effective than distributed generation solar. So that's one that we're watching. Success stories, I mean, again, just like an overall success story is our community solar garden program. Like I said, it's third in the nation right now. We deployed almost a gigawatt of solar in under 10 years. And that's impressive for a small state like ours.
Yeah.
And that was intentionally designed by the speaker, Melissa Hortman, to do that, to quickly deploy that, because she realized back in 2013 when she passed that bill that we needed to act quickly to address the worst impacts of climate change. So that was intentionally designed to do that. Unfortunately, I think whenever you have success, you get a target on your back as well. So we've seen a lot of people trying to undermine and eliminate that program, but it speaks for itself in my mind. So.
Yeah, 1 gigawatt of solar is, and 1 gigawatt of energy in general is a huge number. It's hard to put it into context. I mean, this is like somewhere between 2 to 6 giant coal burning power facilities. Like if you drive down the highway and you see a power generating facility churning out a bunch of steam or smoke, that's like the scale we're talking. So I think it's just important to remember or remind people, like this is not just it's not a small potatoes kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Or eliminating hundreds of thousands of gas powered vehicles off our roads.
Yeah, exactly. Closing up here, what would you give for advice for solar policy decision makers moving forward?
I think we are very lucky in Minnesota to have 3 people in particular in leadership role. Well, more than that, but 3 come to my mind in Minnesota: the Speaker of the House Majority Leader, and the House Chair of the Energy Committee. Really understand the idea of this diverse portfolio of energy overall, but particularly solar. They understand that we need it all to meet our 2040 goals. They understand that rooftop solar plays a role, community solar plays a role, and utility scale solar plays a role. We struggle with that in the Senate a little bit right now, and I would encourage those leaders to adopt that ideology that we can't do this all with one scale of solar. And in fact, if you try to go down the utility scale only route, that is when you're going to get backlash against the clean energy transition. We're seeing it in Wisconsin, where there is a 2,000 acre solar farm, I believe, being built and constructed in an agricultural community. people hate it, and they blame it for a lot of different things. They blame it for cost because it's right there. They walk out their door and they see it. That is another reason to build small DG solar, because it's easier to conceal. You can put it on, the least productive areas of land. I think what makes my job really challenging is I walk into a room and everybody is like, here's this crazy solar guy that wants to put solar everywhere.
You really don't seem crazy to me either. So I think.
Well, you've only known me for an hour.
Yeah.
But truly, like, people think that I just want solar everywhere and anywhere. That's not. I want it everywhere and anywhere that's reasonably feasible, cost effective, and whatever. I also understand that, like, we have different, technologies, batteries, nuclear. I mentioned before. Wind, they all serve different roles, and they think they all come with different positives and negatives, and so that's why it should be diversified. You should have every level of clean energy, because it mitigates some of the cons, but it also brings a lot of pros. Every level does. So yeah, that's my advice. Consider a diverse portfolio of clean energy solutions.
Boom.
Thank you for coming in. I learned a lot. Appreciate it. Very knowledgeable. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Make sure to do that thing, that everyone says at the end of one of these things, like, share, subscribe, do all those things, and take care.